Hi everyone, and welcome back to Farrand on Film and for our Paper 2 revision episode. Thank you very much for everyone who listened to the Paper 1 episode. Now that we're past Paper 1, I hope that it was helpful to you. I hope you felt that Paper 1 was a success, and now it's all go sort of straight towards Paper 2. So this episode is going to be very, very similar. I'm going to just read through some stuff that I've given to my students that they found useful, go through some structures as well, and ultimately again, hopefully help along the way in that we know, paper 1 is done. We've got a week still of school lessons to go. And then we've got half term. And then paper 2, is one of the first papers back after half term. So it's the PM of Monday, the 6th of June. So what I'm going to do, just to start off with, as a bit of a disclaimer again, is just to mention that I've not been asked to do this by the exam board. They've not in any way given the sort of seal of approval of this. This is essentially just a film studies teacher coming to you with the stuff that he's given his class in the hope that it helps other people as well. And my sort of interpretation, if you will, of the advance notice. So just to mention the advance notice, so we get a little bit more for paper 2, for component 2. So component 2 obviously is the global film, narrative representation and film style. So section A, and for the benefit of this podcast and for anyone listening and my students, I'm going to be referring to district 9 for section A. So section A is the global English language film. And we've been given the topics for this one as the key elements of film form. So again, anything to do with camera work, cinematography, editing, sound, mise-en-scène, the distinction between plot and story, and narrative conventions. And then if you go into section B, global non-English language film, for us on this podcast, that's going to be Tsotsi, and this is looking at representation of age. And finally, section C, contemporary UK film, so anything released after 2010. For this podcast is going to be Skyfall, and we are looking at mise-en-scène, and then finally the aesthetic qualities of film. So the one thing that I kind of need to bring up for section A is this idea of narrative conventions, and ultimately what a narrative convention means and what the exam board refer to as narrative conventions, because I'll be honest, it tripped me up and it tripped some other people up as well. So I'm just going to go into the film study specification, which is, if I'm honest, the best place to go to if you're looking for any kind of help in terms of definitions and things like that. And on the film study specification, which thankfully has been updated for next year, but we'll get to that when we get to that, we go into narrative. And this is what they write under narrative. So narrative, the structural element of film form. The way that key elements of film form are organized into larger structures, genre, and narrative involves studying films as a whole. Learners will need to understand how narratives are constructed and be able to recognize the role of the screenplay in establishing the main features of the film's narrative as indicated below. So the distinction between plot and story, I'll come to that in a second. The role of the screenplay in conveying plot and its realization in visual terms. Cause and effect as a structural principle of narrative. Narrative techniques including ellipsis and withholding and releasing. Narrative conventions in screenwriting, including the 3-act structure, plot points, inciting incident, and climax. So really for the narrative conventions, we're looking at that. We're looking at how a film, in this case, District 9, would use the 3-act structure, how it would include its plot points, the inciting incident, and the climax and stuff like that. So hopefully what I'm going to give you today is going to kind of adequately, address that. So District 9, again, the issue with this is that we don't really know on paper 2 how the questions are going to go, in that 2 of the questions will have a 5-marker response, 1 of them won't. Now, altogether, we're marked out of 70. So I'm going to try and, as best as I can, address this. So to kind of start us off, elements of film form. Now, my assumption, again, this is just an assumption. My assumption is this is what will form the first 2 stepped questions for District 9. And I'm assuming, again, assumption, that District 9 is only going to have 3 questions. So if you were to get a question on cinematography, and again, I would imagine the questions are generally going to go, identify one example from your chosen film, 1 mark or 2 marks, briefly explain what this example suggests to the audience, 3 marks or 4 marks. So cinematography, the close-up of Vickers' eye in the finale sequence. So then you briefly explain what it suggests to the audience. So the close-up of Vicus's face illustrates how close he is to a full transformation from human to alien or prawn. For the audience, it is a reminder of Vicus's journey through the narrative, and the striking image of Vicus's face with one eye fully prawn and the other fully human reflects the moral and physical juxtaposition that the character and the narrative have explored. Editing. The opening sequence of the film where the two camera interviews have been edited together with reportage style footage. What that suggests. The opening sequence creates a sense of verisimilitude as the audience is led to believe that what they are seeing is factual as opposed to fictional. This is achieved through mocking up professionally shot footage to appear as both news reports, utilizing amateur-style home video footage and talking head style of interviews, all done to replicate a documentary style of filmmaking. So again, all I'm doing here is trying to just bring out enough points to get you those 3 marks, to get you those 4 marks. Mise en scène. The setting of District 9 itself, because remember, setting falls under mise en scène. The setting of District 9 reflects the issue of poverty that is prevalent throughout the film. The makeshift neighborhood is made up of squalid shacks built from poor materials such as cardboard and thin sheets of metal. The look of the district is reminiscent to the Brazilian favelas, another neighborhood infamous for its poverty. So again, just bringing in a little bit of context there as well. Sound. The diegetic clicks spoken by the aliens, what this typically suggests. The prawns converse using an unnamed language throughout the film. The language is made up of different vocal clicks, which are very reminiscent of some of the indigenous languages of South Africa, such as Xhosa. Now, apologies if I'm getting the pronunciation extremely wrong, but it's Xhosa. This was likely an intentional decision by the filmmakers to ground the alien conversations in reality. So now, here, my assumption is that we're going to skip the 5-marker question here, and the 5 marker is going to go on to Tsotsi, and it's going to go on to Skyfall as well. So, as a 15 marker, then I think this is where narrative conventions and the distinction between plot and story are going to kind of clump together, really. So, explore how your film uses narrative conventions. Refer to a key sequence in your answer. 15 marks. Now, the one thing I wanted to mention about this idea of the distinction between plot and story is that the story is about the who, the what, and the where within your concept, and the plot is about the how, the when, and the why. So the story is the characters, the events that happen, and where it all takes place. The plot is how it happens. Okay, so the plot is when things happen, why things happen, and how they happen. Okay, so with District 9, the story involves Vicus, it involves Christopher Johnson, it involves them living in District 9, it involves them living in South Africa. The plot is about how things happen within the story. So Vicus finding the fluid, that happens at the inciting incident of the film. Why it happens, because it then creates a more moral person out of that, and actually the juxtaposition of him becoming more human, the more alien that he gets, pretty much. So I'm going to read through a bit of a response that I wrote, which by all means might help in certain points, might give you a point to lead on to something else. I'm not 100% whether or not this would actually get you 15 marks. But again, if this is any sort of help at all, a leaping pad for you to get you 15 marks, by all means, I hope it helps. So District 9 uses narrative conventions to withhold information from the audience, create intrigue, and create a sense of verisimilitude. Now, what I've done there with the topic sentence is I've listed 3 things that naturally then will progress me onto writing an essay and going back to and using those headings as paragraphs. Now, what I mean by that is this, so I'll break it down just a second. District 9 uses narrative conventions, so I'm already referring back to the question, to withhold information from the audience, there's point 1, to create intrigue, there's point 2, and then create a sense of verisimilitude, there's point 3. Now, what that means is I'm going to write a paragraph on how it withholds information from the audience, how it creates intrigue, and how it creates a sense of verisimilitude. So, the filmmakers made a conscious decision to withhold information from the audience in order to purposely create an atmosphere, encouraging the audience to second guess everything they see or hear. This is commonly achieved through the use of Enigma chords and documentary style of filmmaking. Now, you could there a little bit go into a bit more detail and explain Enigma chords. The use of Enigma Chords early on in the film creates a strong sense of intrigue for the audience. The use of rhetorical questions encourages the audience to ponder the circumstances posed by those on screen. What happened to Vickers? Why did the command module detach from the ship? Why did the aliens come to a stop over Johannesburg? Unanswered questions such as these create a sense of anticipation in the audience who will continue to follow the narrative in order to achieve closure from these mysteries. The reported style of shooting, amateur style of editing, and starting the film with a barrage of talking head style interviews create a sense of verisimilitude, whereby the audience is subconsciously positioned to assume everything that they are seeing is real or that actually happened due to the documentary style of filmmaking that it represents. Just like the other found footage style films of the time, District 9 capitalizes on the casual audience's knowledge of documentaries to achieve a sense of realism otherwise lost in traditional mainstream cinema. So again, that's a kind of just, I suppose it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. It's essentially what I would consider to be good points and examples from the film. And again, a bit of a structure that you can follow. So your topic sentence, you're saying these are the three things that I'm going to identify. The one thing that I usually get my students to do is to sort of explicitly detail which sequence they're looking at. I've not done that there, but I'm just kind of scanning back down. And there is a point where I say, starting the film with the barrage of talking head style interviews. So that will do it. But if you wanted to be, again, a bit more explicit in that, you could say in the opening sequence, this happens, just so that it's clear to the examiner that that's what you've done. And that's the kind of point that you're going off on. So that's District 9. Let's go into Tsotsi. Now, I think the best little bit of information we got from the advance notice was the Tsotsi stuff, because I think ultimately that's told us enough to try and figure out where we're going to go with this question. So representation of age, surely I'm right in saying that I'm only reading this two ways. I'm reading this as the question is either going to involve young people or old people. So that's pretty much all I'm going to focus on for this section for Tsotsi. And again, I'm imagining it as being a 4-question question, sounds weird, where it's 1 or 2 marks, 3 or 4 marks, 5 marks, and then 15 marks. So I'm going to start off with young people. So name and briefly describe one character from your chosen film. So I've written Tsotsi, a gangster. Now, I've written that because there was a thing a couple of years ago where it was woman and iron about whether or not that gets you 2 marks. If I'm honest, just to make sure that you get the 2, maybe describe him in a bit more detail. So mention things to do with his clothing and stuff like that, just to reiterate. Okay. So briefly describe how this character is represented in your chosen film. My assumption of what the question will be. So 4 points here that I think you could leap off and structure together to make a good answer. He's misunderstood. There is an assumption that he is a criminal. He is a criminal. He steals to survive, not out of joy or pleasure. He does it to survive. He's impoverished. So this word where we refer to people who have been made poor. Okay, so he's been made poor. He's impoverished. He's a victim of apartheid. Part of society thrust into poverty because of apartheid. He's damaged. He lived alone from a young age. He's not fully developed and he has very poor social interaction skills. So, next one. Briefly explore how elements of film form are used to create your first impression of this character. So again, how film form is used to create your impressions of this character. So 5 marks here, I'm thinking. Mise en scène, clothing. His clothing is black and casual. It impairs visibility at night. It makes him easier to remain hidden or remain unknown. Cinematography. He's shot from a low angle from very early on to signify his importance or his dominance. Sound. Non-diegetic Kwaito music. So the Kwaito is the soundtrack that goes through the film. That is Kwaito. Non-diegetic Kwaito motif reflects the age of the character and the culture in which they live. Again, that's how we know about Tsotsi through film form. Finally, for question 15, explore how the specific elements, so in this case, young people, are represented in at least one sequence from your chosen film. So here, again, he's misunderstood. You could discuss the app is lost. He relies way too much on Tsotsi for guidance, because here you're talking about young people generally. You're not just talking about one young person anymore. So all the questions up to this point, you've been talking just about Tsotsi. Here you're talking about young people generally. So you can bring in people like App. So again, discuss App. He's lost. He relies on Tsotsi for guidance. Butcher is ultra violent. And Boston wanted to be a teacher but fell into the life of crime. So again, they're all kind of misunderstood. Sequence, opening sequence. Why do the youngsters have to resort to crime to survive? And it's because they've been impoverished, they've been made poor, they have a lack of resources, and they need to, quote unquote, hunt or poach from the more wealthy side of society. And we see that in the opening sequence in the train station where they kill the guy on the train and basically rob his money. Naive, they have a reliance on older characters such as Suki and such as Fella to see them through and protect them. So they are still naive, they are still young, but they often rely on Suki and they often rely on Fella throughout the film. Now, a bit more of an interesting question, I would say, would be that if you get a question about the representation of adults, adults are older people. And I spoke with my class a lot about what adults meant in terms of Tsotsi, because obviously we see a lot of young people. Do we assume that Miriam is an adult? But to kind of stay clear of that and just make sure that we're on the right side of the tracks, I've chosen Morris as the first person for you to sort of briefly describe. So name and briefly describe one character from your chosen film, or name and briefly describe one adult from your chosen film. Morris, a member of the township confined to a wheelchair. Okay. Briefly describe how this character is represented in your chosen film. So again, 3 points here that I'm giving you. Immobile, lack of movement, he's stuck metaphorically and physically in Johannesburg. Defensive, he assumes the worst of everybody, probably due to his life experiences. Targeted, he's picked on by younger characters due to his vulnerability. Again, a lot of good points there that you can use. Briefly explore how elements of film form are used to create your first impression of this character. Cinematography, he's often seen from higher angles, implying his inferiority. Props, his tin and his coins, further emphasizing his need to beg. Setting, train station, purposely positioned in the busiest part of the city, may refer to his intelligence. He's purposely put himself as a beggar in the busiest part of the city, because he knows more often than not he's going to get so much more foot traffic going through there, and he's more than likely probably going to get money from people. So again, we go into the 15 marker. Explore how older people or adults are represented in at least one sequence from your chosen film. So, impoverished. Some of the older characters, Morris, Fella, Suki, like Tsotsi, were made poor by apartheid and have found themselves living in Soweto in squalid conditions. Now, Soweto is the name of the township, so that is Soweto. Nouveau riche, a small portion of the adult characters, so the Doobs, the people who are the parents of the baby that Tsotsi steals, are considered to be nouveau riche or newly rich. They are lucky to be they are the lucky ones following apartheid. Post-apartheid. So the police officers best represent the post-apartheid nature of Soweto and Johannesburg. Equality is alluded to, although white Captain Smith still orders black Sergeant Zuma around. Resourceful. Because of their impoverished nature, the people of the township are resourceful, using what they have to make the best of it, as in Miriam's mobiles. Now, again, I know that I mentioned that we're unsure whether or not Miriam is an adult or classed as an adult for this question, but generally in that answer, in those points that I've just given you, you've got Morris, you've got Fella, you've got Suki, you've got the Doobs, and you've got Captain Smith and Sergeant Zuma. So there's a lot of characters for you to be talking about there. I know I've not mentioned a sequence in that answer, but again, I think you could be talking about after Boston is beaten up by Tsotsi, Suki looks after him. Maybe that links to her maternal nature. And again, you could mention that sequence where they all go around to Suki's house. One thing to mention just while I've kind of remembered it before we get into Skyfall is in terms of structure, I think the exam board always put in bullet points for your 15 markers and for your 20 marker. Now, your 20 markers, obviously paper one, so that's been and gone, but your 15 markers that you're going to get for districts, you're going to get for Tsotsi, you're going to get for Skyfall, you're going to get for these 3 questions on paper 2. Use the bullet points. If you don't like the way that I'm sort of suggesting where in your topic sentence you mention maybe 3 adjectives and then go into and breaking down those adjectives and what they mean, use the bullet points. They've been put there for a reason. They're there for you to structure your answer. Don't just forget about them, as a lot of students do. So, Skyfall, last one. So for Skyfall, we've been given mise-en-scène and we've been given the aesthetic qualities of film. So I think mise-en-scène is going to form the first 3 questions for this. And then obviously the aesthetic qualities is just going to be the last 15 marker. So identify one element of mise-en-scène used in your chosen film. 1 mark, then we go into 4. So costume, suits worn by James Bond and Silver. So question 2, briefly outline how this element of mise-en-scène is used in your chosen film. 4 marks. The suits worn by Bond and Silver initially reflect the professionalism of both men, suggesting that they are masters of their crafts. The colours of the suits subvert the typical juxtaposition of the characters. Bond tends to wear darker tones, signifying a dark personality, while the villain, Silver, wears lighter tones. So again, juxtaposition. I'm going to come back to the next question, the 5 marker. Going to setting then. Identify one element of mise-en-scène used in your chosen film. Setting, Shanghai. Briefly outline how this element of mise-en-scène is used in your chosen film. Globe-trotting. Conventional of the traditional spy and espionage thrillers and the genre in general. Agents such as Bond are usually shown in far-flung locations such as Shanghai, but also in Istanbul, Macau, and London. So again, that would really need developing there. You can talk about what each sort of corner of the world, if you want to refer to them as corners of the world, even though Shanghai and Macau are very close to each other, I'm assuming. And then props. So again, if you wanted to mention props for this one, so identify one element of mise-en-scène from your chosen film. James Bond's Walther PPK gun. So what does this mean? What is it? Briefly outline how it's used in the film. Nostalgia. Throwbacks to the history of the Bond franchise, along with other props such as Bond's Aston Martin and gadgets provided by Q. Access to such high-quality weapons is also conventional of the spy and thriller genre. Now, question 5, or the 5 marker, I should say. Briefly describe how mise-en-scène helps create the mood or style of your chosen film for 5 marks. Skyfall aims to be a nostalgic throwback to the glory days of the James Bond franchise by resurrecting icons of the series with props such as Bond's Walther PPK gun and his Aston Martin. Audiences expect to see Bond travel the globe, and Skyfall delivers on this by visiting Istanbul in the opening scene, Shanghai, and then Macau shortly afterwards. Both the use of the setting and props, as mentioned, create a nostalgic style and a typically conventional mood of old school espionage. So again, you're kind of going back through all 3 points there. So it depends on where your starting point wants to be. If you want to start with costume, go for costume. If you want to start with setting, go for setting. If you want to do props, do props. But ultimately, in your 5 marker, you'll probably end up mentioning all of them anyway. So finally, question 15. By this point, you'll be ready. You'll be done. You'll be nearly there. The clock will be ticking down. You've got hopefully half an hour left or 20 minutes left or something, and you've just got your Skyfall question to do. You can do this. We'll get there. So explore the overall look of your film, because obviously aesthetic means look. Refer to at least one key sequence in your answer, obviously. The overall look or mood of Skyfall reflects one of the key themes of the film, old versus new. This look or mood is created through a combination of lighting, colour, and cinematography. Lighting, the old side of the theme, can be seen through lighting as Bond is seen through silhouettes and deep shadows, which is reminiscent of the film noir genre. Colour. As a whole, the theme of old versus new is best reflected through the film's use of colour. Old is shown through an orange hue, used to represent physicality and the dirty reality of field work and the old-fashioned spycraft that is to Bond's liking. New is shown through the blue hue, representing modern, new, digital technology, virtually cold, which is to Bond's distaste. The colours are best shown in the Shanghai sequence, where Bond is seen to be struggling in a fistfight coated in a blue light, while Severin, an attractive and generic Bond girl, is seen from a distance in a warm-coloured room dominated by orange lighting. Cinematography. The cinematography throughout the film reflects the duality of this theme, with Bond stuck in his old ways and Silver adopting newer technologies, being shown through reflections signifying that whilst different, they are 2 sides to the same coin. Oh, metaphors. Yeah. Anyway, you get it. So hopefully that's been helpful. Again, in terms of structures, I think for a 15 marker especially, you're best off going down the route of giving yourself a topic sentence, thinking of 3 things that you can discuss. So like I did with the District 9 question, withhold information, create intrigue, create a sense of verisimilitude, and then talk about the 3 and how it manages to do the 3, and obviously give the examples and stuff like that. Make sure that you're talking about sequences for any question that's worth 5 marks or more, to make sure that you're getting all of those marks. And if you can bring in a little bit of context just to add that little extra fluff to your answer. But best of luck to everyone listening. I hope this podcast once again has been helpful. I hope it's been helpful to my students. Thank you very much for everyone who listened to the first one. It was by far our most successful episode. So again, the whole reason this podcast exists is to help students like you and teachers like you who are listening. So if you need anything else from me, by all means, let me know. Follow me on Twitter at Adam Farrand and Farrand on Film. If you really want to, go over to our sponsor, Off-World Tees, and use the code Farrand. That's FARRAND for 15% off your order. Stay safe, look after each other. Good luck with paper 2 for teachers and students alike. It will be fine. You've got this. Listen to me droning on again if you really, really want to. And I will see you next time. Good luck.